Welcome back, everybody, to the Aviator podcast. I'm Andy, the Valley Egg Pilot. Today, we're on episode number 2. I'm sitting down and chatting with a friend of mine from Georgia, Matt Peed, and today we're going to get to know him and a little bit about his experience. Then also, we're going to talk about some turbine transition training he's doing. At the end, we're going to talk about quality application, touch a little bit on herbicide and dry work, and what it takes to make a quality application. So with that, the Egg Aviator podcast spools up now. Before I get into quizzing Matt, we're going to talk a little bit about our sponsor quick, American Designs. American Designs is a company started by a friend of mine, Travis Sam, and he is an egg pilot that is building parts for egg pilots, like the mirrors you may have seen on my airplane, some nice windshield visors, and air tractor steps. On top of that, Travis is in the process of building the first one-stop online shop for egg aviation parts. The whole concept of the website is that we take all the phone calls and trying to figure out who has what out of the picture. You just hop onto AmericanDesigns.com. You can find nozzle parts, airplane parts, etc. Now, it's just in the beginning stages, but I can tell you a little bit about what he currently offers, which is Egg Pilot X systems, complete smoker oil systems from Compro, and a series of RAM mounts like the phone, iPad, and even the coffee mug ones so you're not dumping your coffee all over you while you're flying. So if you're interested in that, head over to AmericanDesigns.com. That's spelled Alpha Mike Bravo ERICAN Designs.com. Thank you, Travis. Without him, this podcast would not be happening right now. And I wouldn't be chatting with my friend Matt Peed from Georgia. Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Doing good. Great. Now the tornadoes passed your house.
Yeah. We just had one about 30 minutes ago, passed about 12 miles south of the house. Fortunately, no damage to our place or the farm, but a lot of rain. We've had about 10 inches of rain in the last probably 10 days or so.
Well, good to hear you made it out of there all right. I was kind of caught off guard when we were talking earlier, and you're like, oh, there's a tornado warning right now. I might not be able to record, but everything ended up being all right, and we're going to introduce Matt now and kind of talk a little bit about his experience. But first, I wanted to talk about how you and I met, because I thought that was kind of an interesting story. So we didn't meet in 2019, but this year, 2020, at the NAAA convention in Savannah. I go to the speed mentoring things every year in Compass Rose. I went to it in 2019. It was really cool. For those that don't know, speed mentoring, it's an event that the NAAA puts on at the national convention where they take an operator, a pilot, and an insurance agent. They sit you down at a table. They got a couple other inexperienced guys with you, and you're free to ask these mentors whatever questions you want. It makes for some pretty awesome conversation between everybody. I learned a lot last year, and I thought, I'm still learning now, so I should probably go back. And Matt ended up sitting down at my table, and we were talking about fatigue or something like that, and I had mentioned some point, or you were talking or something, I can't remember, but you look over and you're like, you're the Valley Egg Pilot guy, aren't you? And I just kind of froze for a second because I wasn't sure if I should answer that question. Maybe no. Yeah. And anyways, I said yes, and he didn't start chewing my ass, so that was a good thing. And he's like, yeah, man, I'm Matt Peed. I follow you on Instagram. That's pretty cool. And I was like, awesome. All right. Okay. Dodged a bullet there. He approves. Yeah. So, and then later on, I got to talk to you on the trade show floor that day, and we talked about doing this. I said, hey, what do you think of a podcast? So it only makes sense that you're one of the first guys I have on. So
well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I did not get past the first turn on the trade show floor the entire day. I don't know how many people I talked to. It was good to see some interest from the younger crowd there. I guess that's kind of an interest of mine, is talking to these younger folks, getting in or wanting to get in the business. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and it's a good place to do it. I mean, that's where a lot of new guys come. Compass Rose and speed mentoring are pretty good opportunities to know what you should expect.
That's correct.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're at, and a little bit on your background.
Okay, well, I'm from Georgia. Grew up in a little town of Statesboro, a farm there, and we kind of moved around the country flying. I got my licenses and whatnot back in the year 2000, so I've been at it about 21 years or so now. But didn't start flying ag until 2008. Kind of went through a career change there. It's been a good one, and I haven't looked back since we started. But anyway, I am 47, married to my wife. Her name is Elise. We've been married 25 years and got 3 kids from 21 to 14. It's life is good, not without its challenges, but hey, that's what makes everything go.
Absolutely, man. Teaches you a lot.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. But I got started flying ag at O'Brien Flying Service down in Iowa, Louisiana. I guess if I have an opportunity such as this to publicly thank Dwayne and Leon and Charlie and Paul and Hoss, all those guys that I was very fortunate to land where I did, because those guys just have years and years and years and years of experience and are just great people. And learned how to do dry work, how to plant rice, and we planted rice, wheat, soybeans, and did a lot of cow pasture work and did a bunch of herbicide work. I was very fortunate to land with those guys and learn. Worked down there, also worked in the Delta and the Boot Hill, Missouri, and flown timber with M&M Air Service all over the Southeast, and ended up in 2013, ended up back here in Southwest Georgia, and through various turns of events, now I fly a Dash 34 Thrush for a large farming operation. So I'm here home every night. I don't do any more traveling anymore. It's pretty irregular schedule, so yeah, I kind of enjoy that.
Yeah, awesome. Now that you're back home in Georgia, you're done, being on the road like a young guy like myself probably wants to be doing. What's your season like there? Time frame when you start and when you end, and super busy, or is it fairly relaxed?
Okay, well, we are a cotton, corn, and peanut operation. Probably, 10,000 acre operation, give or take, and just around figures. And I do have some outside customers as well, but I was approached by these guys, and it's a father-son, good folks, hardworking people. They had been kicking around the idea of getting an airplane, so we got together, and they said, yeah, we'd like to do it. We just need the right guy, and so I guess I'm that guy, because here we are 4 seasons later. But I set up the 137 with the FAA, did all that stuff with the help of a good friend of ours who died a couple of years ago, Frankie Williams, Sutherfield. I know some of your listeners will probably know those guys. Those are dear friends of mine. But anyway, got all that set up, and we our season, well, right now I got about 1,800 acres of 2,4-D and Roundup to do. It is extremely wet right now, but I tend to do some burn down before planting season. The first thing we put in the ground is corn, and then I will do all the herbicide work on the corn, which is Roundup and atrazine. We will then, as soon as the corn is done, everybody starts planting peanuts. Probably when the peanuts get planted or close to being done, we'll start planting cotton. On the peanuts and the cotton, I will do all the fungicide on the peanuts and all of the PICS or growth regulator and insecticide applications on the cotton. Occasionally, when the weather gets cantankerous, I will probably have to put some fertilizer out on some corn and some cotton. I've had to do it a couple times
Okay.
when it gets wet.
Some top dressing?
But, yeah, some top dressing and whatnot. And then in our seasonal run, usually from, say, right now we'll do a hit and miss, burn down. And then we run all the way into the defoliating ends, usually starts toward the end of September and ends, say, the middle of November.
Okay.
Our busiest time of year is going to be, I'd say, middle June to, say, the middle of August, depending on what the weather does.
That's one thing to me that is like so common. It doesn't really seem to matter where you're at. That time frame is the busiest for everybody. Like even like I was in South Dakota for a while, and in that company we did some work in Nebraska and Kansas, and now I'm working up. I mean, now I'm spraying a half mile from the Canadian border some days, and it's just that time frame. That's just everybody's busy season, and it's crazy that changing climates, that doesn't seem to change at all. But.
Right. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it seems to be that way. But and then during defoliating, they'll start digging peanuts about sometime September. Typically, what we've started to do is I'll plant about 1,800 to 2,000 acres of cover crop, which what we've been putting out is a 50-pound mixture of mostly wheat, but also some daikon radish seed in there. And what we'll do is put it out just ahead of the peanut plows. So you'll spread over green peanuts, and the plows come right behind you. And the action of them digging and turning those peanuts upside down incorporates that seed. So when they come back and pick it, it does a great job, comes up like a carpet.
Nice.
And that's our cover crop. So I do that. So there's a lot of changing over that I have to do to the airplane, which I'm an old veteran at that, being a rice pot. We change over twice a day. No big deal. If you got your airplane set up 15 to 18 minutes either way, and you're back going. So
that really changes with the country too. I mean, even I know when I was in South Dakota, quite a bit of top dressing on corn happened there, and they told me back in the day when there was a lot more wheat that they were spreading during they were spraying during the morning, spreading when the wind picked up, and back to spraying at night. And yeah, like you said, a lot of you guys that are down south in rice country have done that. But I'll tell you what, if you come up to Devil's Lake, North Dakota, you can watch me screw around for a half a day trying to put a spreader on my 402, because I did a whopping 130 acres of radishes this year, and that was all that thing ever saw any use. So yeah, once you do it a couple times though, and you get a good setup going, it goes pretty quick.
Yeah, there are lots of things that you can do to your airplane in terms of quick connect and how you set your aircraft up that really help and facilitate a quick change over.
Yeah.
So it's really as in most things in life, it's all about the setup.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. So when you finish up your spray season, what typically occupies your time in the winter?
Okay, well, I'm a maintenance guy too. I'm an IA and all that, and so I'm responsible for the maintenance on this airplane. So I really keep a tight rein on my maintenance. I take a very much of a proactive stance towards preventative maintenance and so forth and so on, because I cannot stand to have any kind of breakdown during the season. So I really go through as many systems as I possibly can. And if I happen to have some slack time during the year, I will, if I have an issue, I will take care of it then. There's nothing quite like the feeling of having a lot of work to do and then having some petty little maintenance issue cause a breakdown. Kind of like a dime holding up a dollar kind of thing. Just really doesn't go well with me.
No.
But so winter time is usually spent maintenance. I've got one airplane. The farm has a couple of other aircraft that I do some work with maintenance wise. Also do some. I'm a CFI because I guess we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I've got a Super Cub that I do some primary teaching in as well. I really enjoy doing that kind of work. So, but anyway.
So next, we're talking about turbine transitions, and this is a big topic, I think, in the industry. Before I start asking Matt about his turbine transition course, I am going to explain to everybody out there who may not understand the importance of turbine transition training and kind of what it is. So before the turbine engines, we had piston engines, reciprocating engines. And the saying goes that a piston airplane is overweight and underpowered. Now, some people might dispute that and say that's not true. And for some airplanes, maybe it's not. But I can tell you for the egg truck that I was flying, it had a 220-gallon hopper on it, and the best I could do was 175 gallons. I just didn't have enough horsepower to get it off the ground with any more than that in the hopper. And back in, don't quote me, I don't know exactly when, but I want to say late 70s, I think Air Tractor came out with their first turbine airplane. The power-to-weight ratio of a turbine engine compared to a piston engine is dramatically different. Turbine engines are quite a bit lighter, and they also make more horsepower. So before, you were heavy and slow. Now you're lighter and you're faster. That's the key difference, is that you are able to carry more weight and you're going faster. I was not around during the 80s and the 90s and even the early 2000s as turbines started to become a overwhelming majority of the airplanes in the United States fleet. But as far as I'm aware, there was not turbine transition training. Somebody can let me know if there was. Give me a history lesson. But as far as I know, there wasn't. And people were just, they had flown, let's say, radial air tractors for 15 years or whatever, and they bought a turbine, and they learned how to run the turbine, and that was it. So now fast forward to, I guess, my day and age, and I've heard about turbine transition training ever since I started getting into this. Why do we need training when moving to a turbine airplane? First off, the wire at the end of the field comes at you a lot faster now than it did in the Cessna, and I'm speaking from my experience. I remember the first field I flew with a wire on it when I got in the 402, and it was kind of scary how fast that wire came at me, and I realized I had to start leading more to get out of the field. The other thing, not only just, moving faster, obstacles are happening faster, are coming at you faster, but you can also haul more. So as I stated before, I could never haul a full load in the Cessna, but now, even with the Dash 11, I can haul 400 gallons in the 402. So you can haul more weight. The third thing I'd say that is an issue, you're not running the turbine engine at full power all the time, because you actually have too much horsepower as the weight starts to come off, as you're getting the load off the airplane. And what can happen is it inspires just a little bit too much confidence. You're going fast, you're feeling productive, you've got all the horsepower in the world, you feel like a free man or woman because this thing will just do whatever you ask it to do, and then you make a mistake, install on a turn, etc., etc. So it's just a little bit too confidence-inspiring. Typically, most people are starting their first year in a piston, and the main reason why is because of insurance. But also, if you've flown a piston airplane, you learn to respect the egg planes, because that Cessna, man, it told you when it was fat and heavy, and if you thought you were going to hot rod that thing around, it told you real quick that you weren't going to, so you had to respect it. And in the turbines, in the air tractors, so far for me, you can get really, really, really close, I feel like, to the edge of the envelope, and you still feel pretty confident in the airplane, where it was a lot more obvious, I think, in a piston. A fourth thing about turbines compared to pistons is that although they are fairly simple to operate in comparison to the piston, they are substantially more expensive to fix if you screw one up. And there are a few easy ways you can mess up a turbine engine. It's good to get some training and understanding on how exactly they work, because if you fry one, your employer is not going to be very happy, because that can be anywhere from a $50,000 to $400,000 endeavor to either get a new engine or get one fixed. So another reason why people are doing turbine transition training is because of insurance. So the pilot has to be insured in the airplane that they're flying, and the insurance company can dictate what that pilot has to do to be allowed to fly that airplane. Like for me, to get insured in the 402, I had to take a turbine transition course. Every insurance company is different. Some people might not require it based on your time. It's really all situationally based. I was able to go do the turbine transition course in the 502 sim down in Nebraska with the University of Nebraska Extension. Because I did that, I turned in my certificate from passing the course. I was insured to fly the 402. So I guess people can debate whether that's necessary or not, but I think insurance companies are really holding everybody accountable and making sure that people are being properly trained before they're being thrown into this fast, expensive airplane that they could get hurt in really quick. So Matt's got his own turbine transition training course going on. So Matt, why don't you tell us just a little bit about that?
First of all, I fly a dual cockpit, dual control Dash 34 thrush. I didn't really set out to do this kind of work. I guess it just sort of happened that we ended up with this airplane, and I was a flight instructor, and I've always enjoyed teaching. I really kind of like the specialized nature of, say, doing just say tailwheel training or this type of work here. But anyway, individuals that I've had done training with have been folks that have had maybe a year or two, maybe in like an ag truck or a radial thrush or air tractor, and then they're going to the following season be in a turbine. And so, I would say probably half have come from that background. The other half have been, fresh commercial ticket, most of it tailwheel time, and they're going right into a turbine airplane. Because as you mentioned, depending on the operation and the operator's safety record and the rapport that the operator has with their insurance agent, that's probably not much of a stretch these days to go right into a turbine airplane. Your mileage may vary depending on who you're talking to, but I've talked to underwriters. That's kind of a scary thing. I've actually had them call me. I've actually had them call me after I've flown with a couple of individuals and want my honest opinion. Can they safely operate this aircraft? And the first time that happened, that really, I kind of had to think about it for a little bit. You're really asking a lot for me.
Because a guy's career is literally in your hands at that point.
Yeah, right. And of course, I didn't have any issue with the guy that I flew with was outstanding, an outstanding pilot. He's flying down in South Florida now. An awesome guy. It just took me aback a little bit. The underwriter, coming out and asked me that point blank. I said, well, sure, the guy, I signed his logbook. I think he'll do great.
Yep.
So that does happen on occasion. It doesn't happen every time. I have a young man coming to me next month. His operator is a super guy, very, very professional outfit. This guy's, I think, he's probably got about 400 hours or so total time. He's going right into a 34 thrush. He will do fine.
So one thing you kind of already touched on that I would like to point out to guys is, what do you want somebody to have prior to taking your course? And that's time, how many years of experience, but you kind of already answered that. And it's really just situational, kind of dependent on where they work and what they're going to be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
And
it is.
I just really want to point that out because we mentioned in the first episode a little bit that this industry is just not like airline. Everything is situational dependent. And as much as I know I wanted to do this, and a lot of other guys that want to get in, okay, what's the path? What do I got to do?
Yeah.
Give me we're checklists. We're pilots, right? We're checklist guys.
Right.
It's like, I want to check off X amount of accomplishments and then I'll get my job. But, even what you just described right here with your course is that all your guys kind of sound like they're all a different story and they're all kind of headed a different direction. So,
right. Yeah. Everybody's different. I did. So, for instance, I had a young lady. She flies in Southeast Missouri for family. She came in with 250 hours, a fresh commercial ticket. Most of her time was tailwheel because she'd gotten her private and everything in her tailwheel. So she had plenty of tailwheel time. She was going right into a 34 thrush, and her situation was such that she was going to start out doing dry work exclusively. And one of my friends, a guy I knew that had been flying for 40 some odd years, he's functioning as her mentor. She's in a great situation there. This has been several years ago. We spent 15 or so hours flying in the airplane, in the thrush. that's kind of on the expensive side. If you just look at the numbers, that would be expensive. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you look at it from, what we accomplished and what she's doing now, it really wasn't all that much.
Right.
I just remember my granddad fought in World War II in the Navy, and, they were taking kids, 20-year-old kids, and with, a couple hundred hours maybe, and, putting them in a 2,000 horsepower Corsair or, a P-47 Thunderbolt. Wow. They lost a lot of guys in training. Yeah, I understand that. They were able to do it because of the training program.
Right.
Now, there's a lot of nuance that I just left out a lot of that. But
yeah,
my point is that you can take the right individual that has the right attitude and the right skill set and give them the right training, and they're able to do this successfully.
Right.
If they have that kind of support system.
Yeah. And one thing that I'd like to point out in this case in particular with this gal is that where I'm at up here, dry work is kind of like far and few between. I mean, sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't, but just in the location that she's at, that's an option. And I guess, could you maybe touch on a little bit how being down south where you got rice work and stuff where you're going to be doing a lot of dry, that's beneficial to a new pilot?
I certainly can. In my own experience, when I showed up down there and, started working with Dwayne and them at O'Brien's Flying Service, they started me out fertilizing. I remember I can take you right now to the field. I know where it is. But I remember Dwayne's just looking at me and say, hey, we're going to put you on dry work and, you're going to be up high. Can't really drift fertilizer. I mean, okay, so you drift it on somebody's grass and it grows. Okay, nobody's going to
no
get
feelings
mad.
hurt.
Yeah, nobody's going to get their feelings hurt if you're fertilizing their garden extra or whatever.
Yep.
Of course, this was obviously after I had spent some time in the airplane getting comfortable with it. We were flying B model AgCats at that time. But hey, that's how I started. So, and if you are, I would say if you are able to start out that way, it's a good way to start out. But I understand not everybody's situation lends itself to that because, like you said, y'all's area, y'all don't get the opportunity to do a whole lot of dry work.
Right.
So you have to, basically I was being eased in picking the type of application that I could do that would be as benign as possible, so that I could just focus on flying the airplane, stay up high, don't have to worry about hitting anything, and just fly straight lines across the field. And these guys some of them been doing it longer than I've been alive, and they knew how to set the airplane up, set your gate at this, don't even worry about it,
Yep.
And don't worry. And I was told, don't worry. If you run out of fertilizer, don't worry about it. Come back and clean that last little pass up. It was a very low stress way of getting someone broken in.
Right. And that's kind of where, like, in that situation with her, that maybe getting that commercial ticket with plenty of tailwheel time and going to do your course, fly 15 hours with you, and going back home to worked out just fine. Whereas, like, guys up here, again, we don't have that opportunity. I mean, we're doing liquid right off the bat, and you're working down low and you're working heavy. And just to kind of point out some of the situational differences, and that this isn't an XYZ business. You just don't check the marks and get a job and go to work every day. Like, it's just it's situationally based.
Yeah, and I would say that the average number of hours that someone comes to get with me for a quote unquote turbine transition is typically 3 to 5 hours. And basically you got an individual that say, hey, comes in and it's got 2 seasons flying an ag truck or a radial cat or whatever, and they're going to an air tractor or a thrush, and the insurance company, a lot of this is dictated by the insurance company. And just, So as most everything else is these days, it seems like, they can fly. We know they can fly the airplane. That's not the issue. The insurance company just wants them, or the operator wants them just to be comfortable starting, going through the procedures, understanding, how the turbine engine works, just some basic stuff about it. I'm a mechanic. I've split them apart before.
Yep.
I don't know I'll tell you right now, I do not know everything, there is to know and I would not classify myself as an experienced turbine engine mechanic. I do basic line maintenance on these engines. I mean, and that's it. I'm not an engine shop. I know how to operate them correctly, and I can just give my experiences. I try to pass my experiences of operating these engines and actually working on them to my students. And then the flying part, 2 hours, 3 hours, they've got it. They already know. They've already been flying GPS. There's no need to turn the GPS on.
Right.
We just want to get them comfortable in the airplane and understand the basics of how to operate a turbine engine, what to look for. And, and I tell a lot of students, hey, when you get back to your operation, you need to ask you need to ask the guy who writes the check, are we doing any kind of trend monitoring on our program? If you got an MVP 50 in there, hey, it does it for you. You just download the stuff and send it to your maintenance shop when they ask for it. How do you count cycles? You count them differently for Garrett's. You count them Pratt's. There's different service bulletins, obviously, for two different engines. We go through all that stuff just in a conversational way.
As far as the flight lessons go, do you have any sort of to structure as to like what you prefer to do with the student in those 3 to 5 hours, or is it just kind of what does this student specifically need to get down pat?
We do have basics without getting in, being too long-winded here. First, ideally, you would want 5 hours, but I understand everybody's budget is different. Okay, so let's just assume we have 5 hours, 5 different lessons. Okay, so each an hour apiece. The first maybe two, the first half is probably just going to be getting to know the airplane, going out doing slow flight, doing some stalls, those sorts of things. The last half is we're going to be hauling some loads, doing some dumps, stuff like that.
Good stuff.
And we will, as we have time, get in the field, and I'll show them. I try to do this with every one of them. Okay, so if they're going to be flying a thrush or an air tractor, fairly similar as far as the sight picture. So, in other words, and I say that in this kind of context, if you've been flying a cat, or if you've been flying an ag truck, a Pawnee or something like that, and then you jump to the air tractor or the thrush, the first thing people are kind of having to get recalibrated is their whole sight picture.
Yep.
Because you're sitting on top of the world there, so you got all this visibility. The nose, because the turbine slopes way down ahead of you, so your level pitch attitude is different. And so
it's weird. It's so weird.
It's so weird. Yeah. And I remember I watched your video, your first flight, and you had mentioned that, and I was right there with you. I was going through the steps, but I basically take them through initially. You take them through the basic. What's a good structured way for me to make friends with a new airplane? And I tell them, I say, hey, I got 3,000+ hours in a 602. That was like 4 years ago when I jumped out of one. I got about 500 or 600 in an 802. But if somebody called me up and said, hey, I need you to come spell me in my 802 flying trees for 2 weeks. You're cleared, all that. Just come and do it. Would I, even though I got the thousands of hours of time in these airplanes, would I just go and jump in this airplane after being out of that type of airplane for a couple of years? No, I would want to go and take off and find me a nice long runway to go get familiar with, find out how the airplane behaves, and then you just don't jump into something like that. So I take them through a basic how to make friends with your airplane.
Yep. That's a good way to describe it. I like that, making friends with your airplane. The thing that's cool about your course, so you're flying a dual-seat airplane, and for the guys that haven't done this yet or are looking to get into the industry, that there aren't too many two-hole ag planes out there. I would say an overwhelming majority of us, 90%, 95% maybe, our first ag plane, you're hopping in that thing yourself. Like even the ag truck for me, I learned how to fly in Champs and Citabrias, and those things are pretty low to the ground. I got to fly a 180 for 10 hours before I flew the 188, and that was beneficial, flying a tailwheel plane with some more power that's a little bit heavy, but there was a guy with me the entire time. But then you go to hop in that egg truck, and it's like, okay, well, my sight picture's completely changed. I've never flown one of these ag planes on my own. You know, like the nerves get to you. And that's what I talked about a lot in that first 402 flight video too, is just like, even that, you know, I did my turbine transition in a sim. And, And, you know, the purpose of the sim is not necessarily to get to know how the airplane flies, more operations, right? You know,
systems,
engine starts, hot starts, whatever, emergency procedures and things like that, which are all super beneficial and I would recommend to anybody. But at the end of the day, I still had to hop in an air tractor for the first time on my own while my boss sat on the taxiway and watched me go. You know, he's like, yeah, here's this investment I just made in this kid roll down the runway. Hopefully he doesn't wreck it, you know. But yeah, that's the kind of the cool thing about being able to, you know, for you to hop in an airplane with somebody. And do you kind of see that with people, the nerves, or do they seem to be a little bit more comfortable knowing that some guys got their back?
Well, there are, depending on the individual, that there have been some nerves, and I have to tell them, say, look, we got to relax. I'm your friend. I'm your advocate back here. You know, and trust me, I won't. I mean, we can let it go pretty far out of the quote unquote comfort zone, and I can get it back. I've had plenty of practice doing that.
Yeah.
I just try to keep everybody really calm and kind of informal, but on the right track, so to speak.
Yep.
I will say this about simulators. Simulators are awesome. They excel at teaching procedure, because you can go, how many hot starts do you want to do? We'll do 500 today if you want.
Yep. How many engine failures do you want to see? I mean,
it's crazy. So, I mean, my good friend Terry Humphrey over at Thrush, we've worked together a pretty good bit. I've flown that sim over there a fair amount and worked with guys that have flown the sim. In fact, I trained a young man who actually has his own operation now out in Idaho. And he came to see me, but he went through the sim as well. If people, I mean, I always say that, hey, if your budget allows it, I would highly recommend the sim. It's a very good tool.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it would be pretty cool to do something with you, you know, in a 2-seat airplane, but the sim was awesome for the emergency procedures. If you want to see how an engine starts to quit on you, you can see it. I mean, like, you can see your NG slowly start to drop, or you can see your temp slowly start to pick up. Not only that, but you can do it enough times to the point where if you see the situation arising, you know exactly what to do. Matt, what do you think are some of the most important fundamentals for a transitioning pilot to understand?
Transitioning from, say, a piston to a turbine?
Yep.
Okay. I would say, in a nutshell, you really need to get to know your airplane. Our past program, I'll put a shameless plug in for NAAA. If you're not a member, you need to join. But, I mean, the past program is good. And if you'll recall, just recently, I think the year before, they've basically been able to prove, statistics show it, that your first 500 hours in type are when you are most susceptible to an incident or accident. I don't care how many, I mean, you may have flown radial cats for 20,000 hours and you jump in a 502, you are in essence starting over again.
Yeah, that environment changes so much going to a turbine. It does.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. And so and then again, if you remember the little accident graph they had up there, there was a little bump about the 5,000 or 6,000 hour mark.
Yep.
In type. So it's kind of like, I think, in general aviation, I think I remember reading an article years ago that when someone got to the 1,000 hour mark, they were susceptible for accidents because of complacency, and maybe there was a bit of also, hey, I've got this figured out, and all that kind of thing. So you let your guard down. I would say, number one, really get to know your airplane, and that's multifaceted. It's one thing to get to know your airplane just empty, maybe full of fuel and just flying it around. It's a whole nother ball game to get to know that airplane when you're working it.
Yes.
And it's that airplane flies completely different in the wintertime versus the summertime.
Yep.
I mean, when I flew timber, you basically flew year round, and you went through all the different weather, and also take it slow. You got a 400-gallon airplane, maybe the job's 10 loads and you can call 400 gallons. Maybe haul 11 loads or 12 loads. Haul a little lighter. Approach everything with margin. It was interesting in our recent Compass Rose meeting there. We had a couple of accidents this year with some younger folks and some older folks that were stall spin accidents. And that started a big discussion on so-and-so turns this way and that way and whatever. And
right.
You went down that rabbit hole, which is endless.
Oh, yeah.
Where I started to fly, no one ever mentioned anything about how fast or slow anyone was turning.
Right.
Never. It was never mentioned.
I'm glad to say that I've had the same experience.
I mean, when I worked for Mr. George at M&M, nobody ever talked to the guy I flew with. A good friend of mine got killed last year in a seat collision. This guy was a outstanding pilot. We team flew a lot of our tracks. We hung together right with each other. It was that we worked together as a team. No one was trying to, outturn the other. That's childish. We made up our time on the ground.
Right.
How about making up your time with doing your maintenance correctly in the off season so you don't have any downtime?
Right.
Not only on your airplane, but also on your ground equipment, your loader truck, your load pumps, on and on and on. I remember at an LAAA past program, Denny Stokes made the comment or made the statement. He said, I don't care what you look like in a turn. I care about and the farmer cares about what that field looks like 10 days after you left. And that's the real deal.
Yeah.
We get paid to apply. We don't get paid to put on an air show.
Right.
And the deal is, I'm assuming that when I meet an ag pilot, whether it's a man or a woman, I'm assuming they can fly an airplane.
Right.
I mean, that's just a given. My question is, how good of an applicator are you?
Right.
That's what I want to know.
And that's what we're going to talk about later and get into.
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited about that. But I'm glad to say that I've had the same experience that you have, is that I've never had anybody push me for productivity at all.
Yeah. I would also add, in closing out, just, about talking about just the flying aspect of things and getting to know your airplane. I always remember my primary flight instructor was an older guy who was trained by a really older World War II instructor pilot. And he drilled it into my head the first time we got into the airplane, is that a good pilot is always a disciplined pilot. He would say, all right, Matt, what kind of day are we having today? I said, it's a center line kind of day, right? That means landing, taking off on the center line, taxiing on the center line. If you're taking off and you're ferrying 20 miles, 5 miles, it doesn't matter. Ferry above 5 and stay alive. Get up. If you're going a weight distance, get up, way up there. I'll ferry at 1,500. I'm going to get up there. I'm going to get out of everybody's way. I've lost some friend to a midair collision. People hit towers, yada, yada, yada. But if you're going to fly at 1,500, hold that 1,500. Let's be disciplined. Hold the heading. Just because we're ag pilots does not mean that, I'm telling my students this, does not mean that you can just sort of be sloppy. Let's hold some high standards of professionalism.
When we started working and we got busy, when I got sloppy is when I almost made bad decisions. When you get your checklist down, it's crazy. If you don't hold yourself to that checklist one time, it almost certainly something will happen. It seems like
true. Yeah, you get out of your routine.
So
that's routine is a good safe routine is. It will keep you alive,
right?
And will minimize problems.
Kind of going back to the training, this is a good CFI question. I remember when I need to finish my CFI training, but when you're making a lesson plan, what's one of the parts of a lesson plan? Common errors. So what are some common errors you see transitioning pilots make?
A common one is, let's take that sight picture scenario. They've been flying piston aircraft, which have a different nose profile than your turbine airplanes. I'm not speaking of air tractors and thrushes here. Fairly the most common one. Typically, what happens is I said, okay, I warn them. I'll let them know about this. Look, level pitch attitude is going to be completely a lot different than what it was in your, ag truck or your radial cat or radial thrush or what have you. And so a lot of times what happens is guys or gals will take off. When they rotate, they're wanting to bring that engine cowling up and put it on the horizon. And that's like, it's like, I'm looking at sky and I'm having to say, okay, I'm bumping on the stick, nose down. We're really climbing. I mean, the old thrush with a Dash 34 and nothing in the hopper and not, maybe 100 gallons of fuel, she'll climb like a homesick angel, but only to a certain point.
Yeah.
Just not, we're really taking off and got the nose way up high. And they have to get used to that. Okay, well, let's push that nose down. Look left, right. Look at your wingtips in relation to the horizon. Get your head moving around a little bit. Don't fixate on any one thing. And along the same lines, in the turns, I've noticed sometimes when we're turning to final or whatever, the nose will get way up there because they're not used to getting that sight picture, that level pitch attitude sight picture. So getting used to how sensitive the power lever is, the engine responsiveness, those are some things that take getting used to. My airplane is very light on the controls. It doesn't take a whole lot to make her do what you want her to do. However, as the aircraft slows down, the rudder movement that may have gotten you satisfactory results in, say, your Super Cub, Citabria, or ag truck or what have you, that same rudder movement is like times 5 or 10 in your air tractor or thrush. You've got to move your rudder pedals a lot. The throws are a lot longer.
Right. When you're moving fast, they're soft, and that's the way the 402 is too. I mean, when you're moving, that thing it's docile compared to the Cessna that I flew. But when you get slow, and my boss told me the same thing that you said. He's like, hey, don't be afraid to work that rudder when you get that thing slow, because it doesn't take long to get off course, and you really got to throw that thing back and forth to keep it straight. But one thing that you've kind of confirmed through our conversation so far that I kind of mentioned in my first 402 flight video is that the principles of flying a tailwheel airplane have not changed at all in an air tractor or a thrush. They're the same.
They have not.
Yep.
No, you're 100% right. One of the other things that people have, to get used to is the whole steerable or going from a steerable tailwheel aircraft, say like your ag truck or Pawnee or something like that. I know maybe there's some ag cats that still have steerable tailwheels. Going from that into an aircraft that does not, it feels different. And so they have to get used to that. The other thing, too, that I have to caution people with going into the turbine is the use of reverse, being a bit careful with that, especially landing crosswinds. You don't want to be too ham-fisted with reverse because you're going to take wind off your tail, and you need that wind across that tail to keep that airplane straight. So
just so everybody knows what Matt's talking about, on these turbine engines, when you have the capability to reverse your propeller, you're taking that air that it originally was going back on the tail and you're pushing it the other direction. Basically, you eliminate your rudder authority. It's gone.
Yeah. If you're on a wet grass strip and with a crosswind, which you want to be really easy with that. But that's more advanced stuff. Hopefully no one would put a brand new individual out there in those kind of conditions. You could set yourselves up for, heading for the ditch pretty quick with something like that. So, but, that's just something that's going to come with some experience and back to getting to know your aircraft. So obviously what you and I just went through discussing is not for your seasoned ag pilot.
Right.
I would say this would be more for younger people, that are wanting to get in and, maybe be able to listen and get some more clarification on this little aspect of ag aviation.
Right. And another important thing too, we've got operators out there today who, maybe they got a guy that they're getting started and, insurance comes down and they're like, hey, I know your dad just walked into a turbine and you just walked into a turbine, but, we really like these guys to go through a course. It's nice for everybody to talk to you, get to know a little bit about you and what you're doing and what your principles are, so that some guy listening goes, I really like what this Matt guy has to say. Sounds like he's running a good operation. I might want to send my guy there.
Sure. I'll be very quick to tell people that I'm not the only guy out here doing this. I got contacted from a young guy in Mexico. They wanted turbine transition, but they wanted an air track. I know Fran DeCock up in Canada is a great guy. I mean, his videos and his presentations in the past program, I think he does a fantastic job.
Yep.
So he's got the 504 up there. That's the only other guy I know of right now, off the top of my head. Maybe there's somebody else. I don't know. I'm just one guy, and I enjoy doing this. And, here I am. If I can help you, I'd love to.
That's kind of the whole point of the podcast. That's what I love about talking with you. And like you talked about earlier, the more we can do to pass information on to people to make their lives easier or keep them on the right side of the grass, the better.
Hey,
so
that's right.
Well, that's about does it for turbine transition. Now we're going to talk about quality application. And when Matt brought this up, I thought, man, we're going to be talking about quality application for 4 hours. What do you want to talk about? We kind of just want to dive into the basic principles of what doing a good job is. I love what Matt has to say about this. I agree with him quite a bit on it. To start our conversation on quality application, I think we should define that for everybody, So what, in your opinion, is quality herbicide application or a quality dry application?
Legally, we have to apply it according to label. That's probably one of the first things that you really kind of need to lead off with. The other thing very closely to that is kind of gets back to what Denny Stokes had mentioned, but years ago in the past program in Louisiana when I was there. No one cares about the air show you're putting on. They want, if they're wanting you to plant this 1/4 by half, this 80-acre field, and that hybrid rice is going out at 25 pounds to the acre, that's what they want. That's what they're paying for, and that's what they should get. That seed needs to be planted at that rate across that entire field, corner to corner, end to end.
Yep.
And if it's herbicide, field row to field row down, to the edge of the tree, that needs to be killed. If it's fungicide, that entire crop needs to be treated. That in a nutshell is what we're talking about.
When a grower calls us to do something, it's an investment. When you're talking fungicides, that's a big return on investment. Like if I'm going to decide to spend the money, let's say $20 an acre just on the chemical, and I'm going to pay you, let's say, $8 an acre to apply it, that guy expects to make money on that decision. He needs to see the yield gain. In my part of the country, when we are killing canola, if you don't kill canola and you don't swath it, have fun trying to feed that through your combine. When a grower calls me to kill his canola field to make it suitable for harvest, and he gets out there and he's hitting tough spots and he's got to spend 2 hours unplugging his combine because I didn't do a good job.
That ain't good.
That ain't a quality application.
That's right.
Yeah. So
we had talked a little bit about this whole idea of getting to know your airplane. There's several different aspects to that.
It's not just learning how to fly it, but how it applies.
Yeah, exactly. So you're wanting to know in this particular wind, let's say I got a 5-knot crosswind, how, and I'm putting out this roundup, with the way my airplane is set up, how far will that downwind droplets go? And the only way that you will ever know that is you've got to pay attention, you've got to take notes on what you're doing, and you have to go back and look at your work.
Yeah.
When I did my first fertilizer job, Dwayne and Charlie were out there on one end, each end of the field, and they would signal me if I was cutting on too early and throwing fertilizer out in the field, or cutting off too late and doing the same thing, or not, till I got that sight picture right. Because if you're 6'2", like I am, or your sight picture is going to look different in that airplane than if you're 5'6".
Yep, guy like me.
The attitude that it takes to become a good applicator is that you're always critiquing what you did. You're remembering, or you're taking note. Now, it's interesting to me in my area. We defoliate cotton with an airplane. You'll see people go back and clean up their cotton defoliating fields, but I never heard of anybody going back and clean up their fungicide application.
Nope.
Now, I know the wind is not special just to cotton defoliating, which is just about a herbicide. It blows fungicide just as much as it blows defoliant.
Yep.
We've got to do a better job of cleaning up after ourselves.
Right. If we don't start off doing dry, like guys like yourself did, then we're starting off doing insecticide more than likely and fungicide. All across kind of the north up here, wheat fungicide is kind of the big deal. Honestly, unless the disease pressure is really high, which so far I haven't seen it to the point where you can streak up a field spraying wheat fungicide. But
yeah,
he might, if you left a skip, let's say there's a big set of transmission wires running through and you left like 3 acres somewhere that maybe you just couldn't get into, they'll see it on their yield monitor. I've heard it before, like, I don't think this guy got this part of the field. Well, let's look at it. That was just a corner that, I couldn't get into and just, physically impossible. But I have seen, on the other hand, we have sugar beets up here too. Our disease pressure, Cercospora, for sugar beets is really high. And especially on a wet year, let's say you're working up against a set of wires or something that's right on the edge of your field, and you just can't get right on top of them guys and the wind's blowing away from them.
Yep.
If you don't come back in 2 days, those beets will be white. And I mean like white as snow. It's not good. Like that you can see, but
yeah, you would need to come back when the wind switched around to lay a couple passes and let the wind carry that chemical up underneath those wires, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And so the deal is and there are an infinite number of variables here.
Oh, yeah.
I'll go ahead and preface this conversation. I don't know everything, and I haven't done it all. So all I'm relaying is my experiences.
Yep.
And I have worked in some very demanding environments, doing very, very tight herbicide with an airplane. And I can tell you that if you know your airplane, and if you're flying, in your operation safe sessions and whatnot, and your airplane is set up correctly, you can do very tight herbicide work with an airplane.
Yep.
But you cannot work against the wind. Right. It will bite you every time. You cannot do liquid work in temperature inversions. You just absolutely cannot do it.
No. I don't. What's we got a cool rule for temperature inversions. So typically, we don't do a pile of spring herbicide, but we do a fair amount of burn down at the end of the year. If the combine dust starts floating and it's not blowing, it's time to go home.
Okay, that's interesting, because where I really got tuned up with doing really tight herbicide work in the Blue Hill, Missouri, when we saw the dust on the dirt road start to hang,
yep,
you better be shutting down.
Yep.
I'm sorry, you're asking for trouble. But let's just assume there's nothing around. Well, what's happening to your chemical? It's a lot of it is staying suspended. It's not, in other words, it's not going down into the crop canopy. So it's less effective.
Going back to that return on investment thing, I'll just add this to your conversation, but I've seen this in Nebraska. I've seen the wind go dead calm. I mean, just dead calm. Yeah. Somebody goes out, you can see the product not hitting the canopy. I mean, it's just sitting there, not moving at all. And that's, from a grower's perspective, that's disappointing.
Right. And I've seen the same thing with a ground rig. I was going home late, just before dark, when I was working in Missouri, driving home, and there was a ground rig out there spraying something on some cotton. But it at that time of day, it was never. I could watch it come out of the boom on one of those great big John Deere ground rigs. It never hit the ground. No. It stayed suspended right above the crop canopy.
Yep.
It was pretty cool to see. But in our area, the airplane has kind of deteriorated to the point to where it's kind of like I treat it as a 911 service. In other words, we can't get to it with our ground rig because it's too wet, so we're going to call the airplane the last minute, and they want you to do it right then, on and on and on.
Yep.
And I hear fairly regularly from chemical reps that the airplane cannot do as good a job as a ground rig. I can't help but think there's a lot of reasons why that myth is out there. But my thing is, when we're talking about quality application and doing an awesome job, having all your I's dotted, T's crossed, doing everything you can to do the best job possible. If you do that, then you're not giving your opposition any ammunition. In other words, think about it from the standpoint of the past slogan that upon the performance of each rests the fate of all.
Right.
So if you're out there striving to be a professional applicator, then you're really going to be thinking about these things. Okay, hey, take notes on each of, you got a stack of maps there. If the wind is X, and if you know that the wind's blowing that stuff away from that tree line, you need to make a note, say, hey, we have an east wind today. We need to wait till the wind's, southwest or whatever, and come back and make a cleanup pass.
Yep.
Does it take more time? No kidding. Yeah, it takes more time.
Yep.
But a quality job always takes more time than doing it halfway.
Well, and I think to go back to your point about the myth that, we can't do as good of a job, the proof is in the pudding. And people probably won't like this, but the beauty of doing herbicide work is that absolutely at the end of the day shows what kind of job you did. And to kind of tie a couple of things that you talked about together, I'll share one of my experiences this year. So first year that I've ever sprayed any herbicide, again, I didn't do any in the spring. I only did a little bit in the fall doing burn down. My boss did the best job he could of explaining to me exactly, what I needed to do to get edges and, how much to leave off where and stuff like that. He did an excellent job teaching me. I thank him for it. I went out on those soybeans for him. And what he told me was, he said, when you use your right boom shutoff, for those that don't know, most airplanes, spray planes will have a shutoff, typically the right boom, because the prop wash will take the spray that's underneath the airplane and it'll push it to the left. So if you're trying to get an edge, you don't want your spray to be going towards the edge or past it. You want to stay on the inside of it. So you use your left boom and your right boom shut off to keep that nice and straight. And it does a really nice job if you know exactly where to put your airplane. But he told me, he said, take your left landing gear, and he said, put it on the edge of the field. You'll get the edge. Got it. So I go out there, I do that. I put my gear on the field edge, do that. About a week later, I walk in his office, and he's like, okay, sit down. We got to talk about this. Uh-oh. I'm like, uh-oh. He's like, so-and-so called me, and they said there were some edges missed on the soybean field. And I'm like, I said, well, I don't want to seem like I'm trying to deny it, that I didn't do a good job, but I did exactly what you told me to do, I promise. So I'm sorry it didn't go well. No, don't worry about it. It's exactly what you're talking about, is critiquing yourself and going back and going, well, guess what? The 402 isn't exactly like the 802. I just about got to have my left gear in the ditch, to get that edge good.
So you left a little strip.
So I left about 2 feet of weeds, and he told me, he's like, I was gone for a day or something, and he said, yeah, he called me, and I was up that direction, and he said, I buzzed over the field, and he's like, yeah, there's about 2-3 feet of weeds on about the whole perimeter of the field. And I was like, gosh, that just kind of ties what you're talking about all together, knowing your plane, critiquing yourself, paying attention to the conditions. Because that was one of the factors, is that not only did I didn't just have like a quartering wind blowing away from that road ditch and susceptible crops to the north, I had a 90-degree, perpendicular wind. And that's,
so you needed to be over more then.
Yep, I needed to be out of the field way more, because that wind was just strong enough to make that land further into the field. So another good point when we're talking about quality application is to know your product. And you mentioned that right at the outset. You said it's our responsibility that we know the label. And for those that aren't too familiar with agriculture, the chemicals that we use are certified by the EPA, and their certification is their label, basically. And the label's the law. And the label explains exactly how to apply the product. It gives you parameters on weather, water rates, adjuvants, etc. It also lists susceptible crops, things of that nature. So, when we're talking quality application, especially herbicide, it's important to know your chemical, its effects on the susceptible crops around it. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Okay, here's something. Roundup is like a pretty generic herbicide. Roundup is essentially a soap. It's a solvent. I mean, it'll clean your spray system out.
Yep.
And if you have your airplane set up correctly, the right nozzles and all that, and for the speed that you're going and all of that everything is correct. Okay, Roundup's pretty benign as far as wanting to drift. I mean, if you don't have like a super bunch of fines, and if you're putting it out with rotary atomizers, okay, not a good thing.
Yep.
But if you got standard, good nozzles, Roundup usually behaves. I've never really had an issue with Roundup.
Yep.
I've never really had an issue with 2,4-D. Now, there's certain formulations of 2,4-D that we use in Louisiana that we didn't have an issue with. I was, at that point in time, I was told by some of the old timers that when 2,4-D first came out, that there were certain formulations that would volatilize terribly. They were horrible about volatilizing.
Right.
You could put it down and, days later, due to the temperatures, if it got really hot, it would volatilize, and then it would get up in a temperature inversion and sit there and hang, and then it would be blown to God only knows where.
Right. Yep.
And so there have been disasters for that, but nobody puts that formulation out anymore. Gramoxone, you have to be careful with Gramoxone. The only time that I ever fell victim to a temperature inversion was with Gramoxone.
Uh-oh.
And it really caught me off guard. And it was in a field where it was a 100-acre pivot, and like the east half was where the temperature inversion was. The west half was not. I flew this field. It was just one of those like microclimate issues.
Yep.
Really, some of this stuff on the edges stayed suspended. It moved on me about a quarter mile and really singed up some pine trees.
Yep.
It killed some. I'm trying to think of the other herbicides. I'll do Warrant Reflex and Prowl behind. Prowl goes by Stealth. It's a yellow, we call it yellow dye number 5 in Louisiana. That thing would stain it. That stuff stains everything yellow.
Yep.
But I'd put that out right behind the cotton planter, and it's got to be watered in. Here's something about the airplane versus the ground rig. Now, I will tell you, I'll be the first to say it. Our ground rig, and our farm has one, a nice big John Deere thing. Those things are awesome.
Yep.
They're a great tool to have.
Yep.
It's a good tool to have in the toolbox. So people were shocked whenever in my area, whenever I'd say, hey, yeah, I put that out. I put that out behind the cotton planter, just right. They got finished planting. I was right there, knocked it out. They were able to crank the pivot. You got to crank the pivot, and listen, you got to water this chemical in to incorporate it.
Yep.
Okay.
Soil applied herbicide.
Yeah, exactly. And so everybody thought we actually, it kind of worked out. It was interesting a couple of years ago. Half of the field was done with the ground rig, and then the other half I did with the airplane. There was not a dime's difference in the coverage, the residual weed control, nothing. It was the same.
Yep.
It was the first time we had done that. And my crowd was like, hey, wow, we can get you to do that, and it frees up another sprayer because we're trying to get caught up with this other stuff. It's not labeled for air with peanuts. So, hey, we can, they use the airplane as a great time saving tool as well. We can knock this out and be done. Crank the pivot and we're done.
Right.
We're not waiting. If you can spray this field in 40 minutes and you're out, and it may take him 4 hours, but he's putting it out at 20 gallons to the acre.
Right. And they didn't have to drive the thing there. They didn't have to drive the truck there, a load truck or whatever. You're taking off from the farm, right?
Yeah.
I mean, timely application, that's one of the big benefits is timeliness. But
timeliness of application. So I kind of got a little off on there, but talking about just different chemicals. What I put out lots of pasture stuff like Grazon with Cimarron Max, Remedy, which is like Remedy is like Garlon labeled for pastures.
Yep.
It's pretty. I mean, if it's a woody stem plant with broadleaf, it's going to die.
Yep. One thing I wanted to add about knowing chemical, obviously reading labels, but talking to other pilots about their experiences with stuff. Typically during our burn down season, we're working with gramoxone and Roundup, and Roundup and gramoxone affect things differently. If you're spraying, let's say, along a road ditch, just for an example, the grass in the road ditch, if you hit the grass with Roundup, the grass is not going to come back next year. Now, if I'm out spraying gramoxone or its cousin Ragulone and I hit that grass, if I nick it, it might die this fall, but it'll come back next spring. And the reason why I point that out is not because I'm out killing road ditches all the time, but when you're taking into consideration how many passes, how close to this ditch am I going to get today? I mean, obviously, if I have the wind blowing, perpendicular away from the ditch, then I'm going to get the edge. But let's say it's a north-south road, I have a straight south wind, or maybe a light east wind or something that maybe in my mind, it's not pushing it away from that edge, so I have the possibility of maybe dinging the ditch. Knowing my chemical, knowing that, well, if I do this with gramoxone and I just touch it up a little and I accidentally touch it, then it's not the end of the world. So maybe if I'm spraying gramoxone, I get a little bit closer to it. Now, I have not roasted any road ditches so far in my time. If I'm spraying gramoxone and my wind is maybe a little iffy on getting it, I'll get closer with that. But if I'm spraying Roundup and I know if I nick that road ditch, it's not going to come back next year, so I'm not going to push it. Another thing, not even just knowing the chemical, but taking into consideration the season that you're spraying into. When we're doing burn down in the fall, grass is fully matured. It's only, a month away from dormancy. A plant that's fully grown and matured is a lot tougher than a plant that's new. So, if I'm out spraying, I'll use the road ditch example again. Let's say I'm out spraying along a road ditch in the fall. Well, if I have a couple fines that might be lingering into the edge of the grass during the fall, it's not going to harm anything because it's not enough Roundup to kill the ditch. If it's not within your swath width, you probably won't kill it. But in the springtime, you trickle a couple fines of Roundup onto a couple small blades of grass. Let's say you're going along a cemetery or somebody's yard, that's a completely different story. All it takes is a couple fines and you might kill grass or somebody's barley or somebody's wheat if you're out spraying Roundup on beans, for say, or something like that. So as the season's early, it only takes very small, minute amounts of that to hurt something, but later on in the year, as things are tougher, it may not be such an issue. Again, just to state this twice, I'm not going around and drifting on everything, but I'm using these things that I know as considerations when I'm out in the field going, well, how close am I going to push it to this susceptible crop? How close am I going to push it to the ditch? If I'm using gramoxone, maybe today I'm going to get a little bit closer. If I'm using Roundup today, I'm not going to get closer. Obviously, it's an obligation to us to keep things into the field. Obviously, through our experiences, sometimes you do nick a road ditch. I have not yet. I know plenty of people that have. I'm sure my day is coming someday when I'll make a bad decision, and we own that. But these are just things to think about when you're talking quality application and taking into consideration, what your drift potential is.
You just have to be careful with that stuff. Watch the wind. If your aircraft is set up correctly and you're paying attention to the weather, not putting it out in temperature inversion, we always wanted at least 3 points on the temperature dew point spread.
Yep, same here.
And so if you're doing that, then you really should never really have an issue, and the aircraft should do a really good job. If you're flying the aircraft appropriately at appropriate height, there again, we're wanting 15 to 20 feet or so above the crop canopy. You don't want to have your wheels down in there, because I'll tell you, some people, we've got people still in our area that want you to fly super low.
Oh yeah, I've heard that before here too.
Yeah, and I'm like, of course, my crowd doesn't. They say you're the ag pilot. You've got the experience. We're
not going to tell you how to do your job.
Yeah, we're gonna. You do what you know is the right way to do things. So I guess I'm fortunate in that regard. But holy smokes, man! You load up usually in rice country, most of the liquid is a very hot load of multiple herbicides. If you were to fly low like that, what's going to happen is that the middle of your swath is going to be really, really thin, and the outer parts of your, towards the wingtips and all, that's going to be really heavy.
Yep.
So you're going to burn, you're going to streak up a field so bad that you'll never get called back there.
Right.
So we want to be at the right height. We want to be really careful about how we, pull out of the field and all that. We have a lot of trees around here. You want to get in the field and cut on, and you want to cut off and pull out of the field. Go back and clean up your ends. We have people in this part of the world that like to cut on above the trees 100 feet in the air and drag it way. And I'm going to tell you, I've never had a chance to talk to these individuals before about this, but the places where I have flown, if you were seen doing that, you would get one warning, and then you would be, the second time, you would be sent down the road.
Right.
They just wouldn't they would not put up with that kind of poor quality work.
And that kind of comes back to putting productivity over to the quality of the job. So to add to that about shutting off in the field before you're starting to pull out, you're not shutting off at the trees or at the wires. I don't know about you, but I haven't been bashful about leaving plenty of cleanup passes for myself to do, and not even just with herbicide work, but to step back and take a look at it from a safety perspective as well. I was never taught that it's a competition to get really close to a wire or get really close to a tree and pull up over it. I'm not afraid to, even during fungicide season, whatever you're doing, if I start getting tired, I start shutting off in the field like before, specifically with wires, just because they seem like the thing that's the easiest to forget about. I'll shut off further into the field and pull up, and I might leave myself 6-7 cleanup passes, but I just do it because I feel like when I start getting tired and kind of sluggish, that if I'm trying to get as close as I possibly can to the wire, that I'm going to get too close, and maybe if I let it go too far, I'll forget about it. So even just from a safety perspective, not dragging things up to a wire, not trying to get as close as you possibly can. And then again, like with herbicide, obviously we need to be shutting off into the field. We can't be dragging stuff up trees. So, Matt, we kind of get into the weeds a little bit there. There's so many subtopics inside of what we talked about. Really, we could dive into all of those things, temperature inversions, talk about, turning off certain nozzles, boom shutoffs, et cetera, airspeed and how it affects drift. You name it. There's so many subtopics inside of that. We just kind of gave you guys a general overview of what the pilot's thinking when they're making their applications. So I hope that was educational for you. I hope you got to learn a little bit about turbine transitioning and why that's important. And you got to hear from Matt. Hopefully, if somebody out there is looking for a turbine transition course, you can go ahead and get a hold of Matt on Facebook, Matt Peed, MattPeed, or you can get a hold of him on Instagram at matt.peed1911. Get a hold of him there. So thank you, Matt, for taking the time out of your busy night to meet with me and go over this. I'm glad I got to talk to you. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to the Ag Aviator podcast. Make sure to follow me on Instagram to get all the updates at Valley Egg Pilot. You can follow me on Facebook as well, Valley Egg Pilot, and subscribe on YouTube. Thank you guys for all the support so far. We've had a good run on the first episode. Hopefully the success continues. Make sure to share this podcast with anybody who enjoys it. Make sure to like it wherever you see it. Follow us on whatever podcast platform you're on. And always, if you want to get a hold of me, head on over to that Instagram, leave a comment on a post, send me a message. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a good one.